So we're going through Revelation chapter 2, and we're going to pick up with this next church, the church of Smyrna. This church age is known as the persecuted or the martyred church in this age time. And verse 8 says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive." Izmir is the Turkish word, is a modern day name today for Smyrna. And Smyrna was a glorious and amazing city to many, as I'm reading through here. Some of the history. Some even claim this throughout the history to be the glory of Asia. This was a rich city and had great trade going on. Many of the trades were in wines that made them so wealthy. They were rich from that. But there's also a lot of adultery going on in the city too. Idolatry was going on. And probably adultery too. There's no telling. The Golden Street had many temples standing in it. Some of these temples included Cybele, Aphrodite, and Zeus. Many say at this time that the worship of these gods were dying out, and the Roman emperor was becoming a thing of worship to many. Christianity grew at this time, but it was also a great time of persecution in this age. Some say it's about 100 AD to 313 AD was a big persecution age of time. But for example, Polycarp, a student of John, he was burned alive at the stadium in Smyrna. At times, people were thrown into places where wild animals would shred them and eat them alive. So you see throughout history that the truth was not well received by the lost. Society does not like the truth. As I said in earlier videos, the truth demands change, and people don't want that. So they rather just get rid of the voice that they hear. Today, some would persecute us here in America if they could. But however, our time of sharing our faith is right now. It's at the best. It's the best, I believe, but I could be wrong. That a time will be here when we may see many believers everywhere be persecuted. But they would throw people in stadiums, the Christians. They would tie horses or some kind of animal to them. They would tie them to animals and make the animals run in opposite directions. So you can imagine the torture and the deaths they faced in this so-called persecuted age in the literal church of Smyrna. But compared to the other 6 churches, this actually has nothing evil spoken of them. So what a testimony that is to the test they faced. But out of all the churches of Revelation, this church is the only one that still stands. Last time I looked, it's still standing, and that was a couple years ago. But so in verse 8 here, we see Jesus speaking of his eternal character. It says, "And to the angel church of Smyrna write these things, saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive." Only Christ can use this title. Nobody else can. This reminds me of Smyrna and even us today. This reminds Smyrna and us today, in the 2000s, that Jesus is alive. We serve a risen and an awesome King. Death has no victory. Death cannot really hold us down. That's just the next part of our eternity. And but what an awesome testimony to have as a children of God is Smyrna and some of us. But Smyrna also comes from the word myrrh, and it has a sweet-smelling perfume used in embalming dead bodies. Also, the wise men brought myrrh to young Jesus through the gospel accounts. And at that time, it foreshadowed him going to the cross to be sacrificed. We have victory. No matter what happens in this world, we have victory because we have one that has ran this race before us and completed it to a perfect T. Verse 9 says, "I know thy works, and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are in the synagogue of Satan." Jesus knows their works and the tribulation and poverty they face. He knows everything we face today. Our works, our action, he knows everything about us. But don't forget that he cares and knows everything we face. And there will be reward in the suffering we go through. The Smyrna believers were faithful in the midst of everything happening, in the midst of them being murdered and killed and everything else, and persecuted and not received well. The truth has never been received well. That's just the thing. Even in calm societies, the truth ain't received well. Even here in America, you have so many false teachers and so many false prophets rising up. It's unbelievable. Even there's even sheep's and wolves' clothing. Some people call themselves preachers and evangelists and everything else, and they're far from the truth. Freedom has been taken away from these believers at Smyrna, but they stood on the rock of ages. They faced trials and they had poverty in this rich city that I was talking about. The believers were probably fired and faced persecuted from their jobs and their beliefs. People don't want to hear the truth. They realize they're lost. They don't want to change. Like I said, they're comfortable. I believe people are more comfortable in a fantasy life than they are living. They don't want to change their ways. But he says here in that verse 9, but thou art rich, because that's because of Jesus. And when Jesus says you're rich, we should take note. We have royal blood flowing through our veins. What an awesome testimony. We are children of a kingdom beyond this world. We are God's children, and we are free in him. God doesn't look at our physical side. Yes, he does, but he doesn't care about our physical wealth. He cares more about our spiritual wealth. It says, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but in the synagogue of Satan. Those that said they were Jews but could not stand the believers of Jesus. They would say they were Jews, but they couldn't stand the believers. Many of them were hostile towards the truth. He said those false Jews in the synagogue of Satan, they wanted Christians persecuted and practically burned alive. Verse 10 here, fear none of these things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. But be thou faithful unto death, and thou will give thee a crown of life. Talking about the different rewards, and the Bible talks about different rewards. But it says, fear none of these things. Don't be afraid. I mean, yeah, the flesh side may have fear. But he's writing to them and says, there's going to be suffering, but Jesus holds them in his hands. Nothing can separate them from God, not even death. Death is getting them closer to the reward. Physically, things may happen, but spiritually, we are God's, and nothing can change that. Anybody can do about anything physically they can, but we're God spiritually. He has our soul, and that's what matters. We are pretty much promised trials through the Bible, in rough times. That's a guarantee. These people on TV that says you shouldn't be facing it, they're lying to you. That everything will be like, bye-bye and pie in the sky. Nope, it's not going to be that. We're going to face times as Christians. These Christians were killed for their testimony, so it wasn't no peaceful landing for some of them. They landed peaceful in heaven, but some of the physical times they faced getting torn and shredded apart in stadiums and stuff was unbelievable. The devil will throw some of them in prison. The devil is behind everything evil going on. Everything evil. The principality and powers of the air, that's our true enemy. Christians' ultimate battle is not with flesh and blood. Even Paul said that. But the spiritual darkness surrounding this world. Yes, physical battles will occur, but the root is from spiritual darkness. Smyrna will be tried, but God limited to the tribulation they faced 10 days. God has ultimate control over everything that happens. There's no surprises. So he says you should have tribulation for 10 days. Some of the scholars I looked at think this is literally just 10 days, literally. Others think it's 10 different time periods of persecution, or even 10 years. Personally, I would not be surprised if the tribulation lasted for 10 different periods over the reign of 10 Roman empires during this, but no one's 100% sure. There's just different things. But John Fox's Book of Martyrs, I'm going to share a few of these. He said, the first thing he said, Nero killed Peter and Paul. Domitian killed thousands of believers and banished John to Patmos. Trajan burned Ignatius at stake in the first to pass laws against Christianity. Severus killed Origen's father, gave believers the chance to curse God and give offerings to the Romans gods or be persecuted. Just a couple more. Diocletian, he had a very intense persecution, Believers were hunted all around, including caves. Christians were burned, thrown to wild animals, and put to death in many extreme ways under this guy. Later, this ruler's wife and daughter is known to accept Christ. So that's kind of ironic. But the tents, they burn them, throw them to wild animals, just throw them. They have coliseums and just have battles, have them fight animals. Sometimes they would give them weapons. Sometimes they just use their bare hands. They put them in there with bears and tigers and lions. Oh my, whatever. They had everything they had to face. He says, "Be faithful in death, and I will give thee the crown of life." The crown of here is a Greek word for Stephanos, means giving a trophy to someone winning an athletic event, or something a king would wear for royalty. They were winners for Christ because they did not cave into the persecution, even when it looked, pretty frightening to be some of the things they faced. But throughout history, people were given a crown of leaves for victory. Not so long after a victory, the leaves would die out. Those leaves would. It's like the seasons. You see the leaves come and die, go, live and die. However, this crown of life is eternal. The crown that God gives will last forever. There ain't going to be no leaves that die out. It's an eternal crown. The crown of life is given to Christians. Only those that have been born of God overcomes this world. Also, people have been given a martyr's crown for putting their life. 1 John 5, 4 and 5 says, "For whatever is born of God overcometh the world. And this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Who is he that overcometh the world? He that believeth that Jesus is the Son of God." Verse 11 here in chapter 2 of Revelation 2:11. "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death." So notice there in verse 11 it says churches. So he is writing to this specific church, but ultimately the whole church and all the churches around the world are little churches, but there's one main church, and that's all of us. So those that are overcome, born again, would not be affected by the second death. The second death is separation eternally from God in hell. And those that put their trust in God will live forever in heaven. Everybody's live forever eternally somewhere, heaven or hell. If anyone knew what overcoming meant, it would be this age, the Smyrna age. What a great promise for Smyrna, for being overcomers, and also to us believers today. We can take note of this testimony. But we cannot overcome by our own power. It is the grace and power of the Holy Spirit that helps us become overcomers. Many times we face even small battles at times in life, but we are overcomers through Him and Him alone, not our own strength. If we depended on our own strength, because it's limited, there's no way we can do anything. But God's strength is amazing. It's unlimited. There's no limit to it. We cannot put to it. But and that concludes verse 11 right there.